I'm Dr. Julie Pham, founder of Curiosity Based. We help people practice curiosity in the world, starting in the workplace, because that is where we spend most of our waking hours. Curiosity as a practice boils down to self-awareness, relationship building, and clear communication. So join us as we interview leaders to see how they use curiosity at work. Hi there. Welcome to Curiosity at Work. I'm super excited to get to chat with my longtime friend, Jim Loader, who is the Deputy Director at Seattle IT, which is one of the largest departments, I believe, at the City of Seattle, right?
Yeah, we're a pretty good size.
Yeah, and Jim has been a longtime public servant working in higher ed, local government, and in libraries, which is where we first met, actually, when you were the CTO at the Seattle Public Library.
Right.
So, welcome, Jim.
Thank you. No, it's great to be here. I was reflecting in prep for this about going back to our days in conference planning and civic the sort of civic dialogues that you used to host. Those were a lot of fun. So it's good to be part of this and to join you in
Yes,
this
and
space.
actually through that, I mean, that's where a lot of my interest and curiosity started. So you've actually kind of gotten
Mm,
to witness that. So, Jim, let's just start off by you. If you could just describe your role and the the workplace. How many people do they work remotely, hybrid? Just give a sense of Seattle IT and the workplace.
sure. Yeah. So I'm about to complete a 3-year interim assignment as the chief technology officer and department director for Seattle IT within the city of Seattle. So starting next week, in fact, I will resume my position as the deputy director as we welcome a new chief technology officer here to Seattle. And the department, Seattle IT, provides all the IT services and sets the strategy, the IT strategy for the city of Seattle's for the city government. So here in the department, we've got about 670 employees that deliver IT services, that do IT projects, that work on infrastructure, for just a few examples. And total in the city, there's about 14,000 city employees in about 40 different departments, depending on how you count them, ranging from the Seattle City Light, which is the largest department and a fairly significant regional power utility, all the way to the smaller offices, Office of Labor Standards, Office of Sustainability and the Environment, Office of Civil Rights. So it's a very diverse set of business models and lines of business that we have to support here as a central IT department. But we focus on finding the best ways to do that at scale and at delivering those services at the highest value to our clients, but also to the constituents that we serve here in the city.
So, Jim, of the 670 employees, how many of them percentage wise are actually in technical roles versus in
Mm,
non-technical roles?
boy, it's a great question. The vast majority, I would say, have a technical component. 450, maybe 500 are in developer, engineer, tech support, business systems analysis. There's we run a very lean, what most organizations call overhead,
Hmm.
with regard to our business services and the internal services that we manage. So yeah, vast majority are technical. And you had asked about the modality of the work. So we're currently, like the rest of the city, in a hybrid mode, um, with an expectation or an average target of about 2 days a week in the office. Um, and the but depending on the job function, depending on the work that people do, sometimes it's more than that. But we successfully maintained extremely high levels of productivity, issue resolution, of request fulfillment, of all the things that you measure an organization by, when we were all working remote. And what was really missing, though, were a lot of opportunities to establish um, a to establish relationships and really work on the workplace culture. So that's been a big focus of mine over the 3 years that I've been in the leadership role.
Well, that's great because the curiosity at work is really about culture. And so as I ask you these questions, I'd love for you to share particularly the perspective of a public servant, because I know
Yeah.
a lot of people don't understand how government works and how that will impact the way that curiosity is practiced at work, and also the fact that so much of your workforce is technical, and I know you've worked in places where the workforce is not majority technical, and does that influence or not how curiosity is practiced? So let me just dive in then to get your
Yeah.
specific stories here. So we think of curiosity as a practice having its being about self-awareness, about relationship building, and about clear communication. So how have you fostered self-awareness for yourself and or for your team members?
Yeah. Um, well, I think I've always had a very high degree of self-awareness, as I understand that term to mean. But I will say that it hasn't always been a healthy level of self-awareness. So I think we have to recognize that sometimes, just like anything else, there's a spectrum and there can be excess. So ever since I can remember, I've been very acutely aware of my thoughts, my actions, my feelings, my reactions, my behaviors. But at times in my life, to a point where it has been almost debilitating.
Mm,
Um, especially thinking not just about what's happening, but about how that might be perceived by others. And so that has led me at numerous times to be very self-critical, very self-doubting, or even self-shaming.
mhm,
Um, and so I was always sort of aware, but usually from the point of view of wanting to change or correct or fix myself in some
mhm,
way.
mhm,
So through, oh gosh, I mean, therapy, experience, having a really good, supportive, wise partner, a lot of friends over the years who've also been very wise and supportive. I think that I've gone through. I feel like I'm at a good point and have been now for a while, where I can pay attention to my strengths as well as my flaws, and focus or remind myself to focus on those strengths on occasion
mhm,
instead of just constantly obsessing about how I can address the weaknesses. Um, so I think that it's important to note, or I found it important to recognize there's a double edged sword to self awareness sometimes, and that the voices that you need to listen to are the ones who are or you need to sort of give louder voice to the voices that say, hey, you got this, or, this might be hard for you now, but remember, you also are really good at this. Because the things that come easy to us, things we're good at come easy to us, and we don't often stop and think about it. And so I've
mhm,
just built in more time in my own self reflective practices to, pat myself on the back occasionally for having, you know, said the right thing or done the right thing or acted the right way in a particular circumstance. And, that balances everything out. So, um, but working with others, I've been really lucky in my career to have a lot of opportunities to work with others in a coaching and mentoring relationship, whether it's just the relationship that a boss has with somebody who reports to them, or in more of a formal coaching or mentorship relationship. And I really try to listen if somebody is coming at a problem or a situation from a position of self awareness, or if they are kind of stuck thinking about something in with terms that other people have defined,
mm,
right? So are they, whatever it is that they're bringing to the table, whether it's I have a dispute with a staff member, or I don't know what to do with my life, or you know eh, are they really thinking or talking about it in terms that seem to reflect their own interests and their own position, instead of, yeah, like I said, instead of, are they framing things in terms that somebody else has defined.
mm,
And I think one of my first workplace coaching experiences a while ago was working with a young woman who was torn between doing what she needed to do or doing what she felt she needed to do in the workplace to get a promotion
Hmm.
versus pursuing her dream of moving and working overseas.
Hmm.
And I could tell in talking with her that that the attitude toward her job, the enthusiasm she felt toward her job felt very inauthentic, as if she was saying what she felt she needed to say to be recognized as an ambitious worker, while she spoke so passionately and naturally about living abroad. And I didn't have to do much except just point that out to her and just encourage her to listen to the tone and the way in which she changed her manners and the way in which she spoke when she talked about one thing versus the other. And in this case, both of those options were realistic for her in her life. Sometimes that's not always the case, but they were both attainable goals. And and I just encouraged her to listen to the voice that's speaking, at her from her perspective, instead of the voice that's speaking from, say, her boss or her parents or whatever other voices were in her head, convincing her to do the thing that she clearly didn't feel passionate about. And she ended up teaching overseas. I don't
Hmm.
think this was a workplace sponsored mentorship program, so I don't think that the goal of actually driving somebody out of the workplace was part of the objective that the organizers had in mind, but I felt pretty good about the outcome. And after a few years of following her dream, she came back to the organization and got the promoted job that she was after anyway, because she had all of this experience now, life experience teaching and working in different and interesting environments. So but I think back on that because I walked away from that experience thinking, "Ooh, boy, I didn't really do much. I just made a few observations about how she was reflecting this dilemma to herself." But now I realize, with years of experience, that sometimes that's all you need to do is just give that little nudge to somebody to say, "Are you really listening to, are you really being self-aware? Are you really listening to the right voice in your head?" So I think just on a day-to-day basis now, I pay attention to how people present themselves and the issues that they're having, and I just try to call attention to their strengths and remind them that they can amplify those strengths and apply them to the situation at hand. That they don't need to be thinking about or getting into a position of saying, well, I need to develop some new strengths, or I need to build and develop something else before I can tackle this situation. Sometimes you do, right? And there's room for growth and there's room for learning new things. But I just find too often people don't give themselves enough credit for what they do bring to the table, and that they just sometimes, just like I do, need a reminder that sometimes that's what you need to bring to a situation.
Jim, I really appreciate your answer for three reasons. One is it's rare. I spent 9 years in tech. It's rare to hear leaders, especially male leaders in tech, talking about their inner critic. So I
Mm,
appreciate the vulnerability there. The second is that that the work of just self awareness in helping others can just be replaying back how they sound to you, because sometimes they don't realize that they sound really excited here and really flat, and they're just thinking about the content, but they're not actually, they don't understand how it's coming off. And so just to mirror that back is a super helpful tip for any of our listeners. And the third thing I appreciate is, oftentimes I know tech leaders are constantly thinking about scale. How do we
hmm
scale this? How do we do as much as possible with as little effort? And yet, sometimes with self awareness, that one on one coaching, you can't scale that.
right.
You cannot scale that. And what you did for her was transformational. And yet, it required numerous one on one coaching conversations. So, just thank you so much for sharing that refreshing perspective.
Yeah. Thanks for
Early,
those perspectives. That's really helpful.
yeah. And so earlier you talked about one of the big challenges now is relationship building, and I know a lot of workplaces are facing that. So in terms of what do you do to help foster relationship building in your workplace?
Yeah. Well, yeah, earlier I mentioned that, our productivity levels were extremely high during the height, the apex of the pandemic when everybody was working at home. And, that's largely how we as a department were being measured. But I knew and I could see, right, in the way that people were interacting with each other as little boxes on a screen instead of in face to face conversations, how that was degrading, degrading and eroding, I think, the feeling of relationships. And I definitely prioritize relationship building at work. I think the biggest strength of any organization really is the network of healthy and supportive relationships that exist among the people who work there. um, and I've worked in places and I've certainly read about places where factors like productivity or sales, right? Luckily, I've never had to work in a place that sells anything, but sales or, scoring a high performance rating or completing tasks are the highest valued objectives. And, and frankly, work is work. And at the end of the day, all those things matter and they all count and we're all counting them and we're all measuring that and that matters. But relationships are the foundation on which all those objectives can thrive. Building relationships is not counter to or in opposition to achieving higher productivity or higher sales ratings, right? So anything that's going on in the dynamic of an organization that's fracturing or impeding people from developing healthy relations with each other is actually counterproductive to those goals. And I've had conversations and seen that dynamic, I think, represented as essentially, well, you can't, if you focus too much on the well-being or the health or of your employees, then you are not focusing on or then they are not being as productive as they can, right? And I just think that's totally false. I as a leader, I focus on creating an environment of psychological safety for the people who work in my department. I want them to know that they work in an environment that prioritizes that well-being and that's interested in them as a person, that recognizes the unique values and the strengths that they bring, and that has rewards beyond just a paycheck.
Hmm.
Uh, Now, I have a strong opposition to approaches that describe or that use the metaphor of the family in the
Hmm. Hmm.
workplace. I too often that's code for creating an almost coercive situation that people feel they can't escape from.
Hmm.
Um, and I do recognize, and so I recognize and emphasize that we are in a workplace, right? People don't need to be your friends. They certainly don't need to be treated as your family members. But it doesn't mean that we can't develop positive and appropriate working relationships with our coworkers. So modeling what that looks like, because again, you enter into the workplace in your, sometimes your late teens, your early 20s. The only models you have for relationships are the strongest ones are with your family,
Hmm.
possibly with your friends, hopefully with your friends. So, your people are practically adults before they enter into a situation where they have to learn what a workplace relationship is. And it's obvious that they're going to fall back to an earlier model, right, of a relationship that's familiar to them. And that's not always appropriate or healthy in the workplace. So I do think a lot about that and how people not just, yeah, relationships are important, but the right kind of relationship is important. We have a robust employee engagement program that we've been investing in the 3 years that I've been here in this role. And we really do want to provide opportunities through that program. And we do provide the opportunities for staff members to define and develop what our ideal workplace culture should be, recognizing that it's a constant developing process. It's something you have to care and feed on an ongoing basis. Um, but
So,
not,
Jim, clarifying
yeah,
question there. Is it
yeah.
something that people opt into? Is it like a special committee, or is it something that no, these are dedicated roles?
We do have a group that is, I would say, more of a steering committee for that type of work, our People and Culture Council. And that is a volunteer group that people can opt into. But the opportunities that we as a leadership team, in partnership with the People and Culture Council, create, they're open to everybody. And there are some that are focused more on managerial skills, but there are a lot that are focused on just creating an open environment for people to work through what they consider to be, or help identify and work through what they feel are the most challenging aspects of our culture that they confront every day. And I sort of feel like in the leadership role I've had for the last 3 years, my position has been to set the example, to encourage my executive leadership team and their senior managers and managers to hold those spaces, to conduct those, to have space for those conversations. Um, because sometimes just having an honest conversation about feeling overwhelmed or feeling uncertain about the direction of things or feeling cut off from other work teams, right? I mean, we talk about siloing all the
Mhm.
time. Helping that get out in the open so that it can be addressed is often the most challenging part of the journey, right? Is just getting it all out there. So so defining our terms, defining the conditions that we currently experience, and then the conditions that describe where we want to go to, that took a good year, as an organization, to get to. And right now we're working through every single one of those that we found, and working pretty holistically with staff to say, okay, you've said you don't like this aspect of our culture. What about that can change? What about that is mutable, as opposed to just being sort of fixed in our broader workplace? And not what can we as a leadership team do to affect that change, but what can you as an employee do in the way that you are interacting with others, the way that you are presenting challenges or issues or opportunities to your managers or to your coworkers. We've really tried to reflect that culture is the responsibility of everybody. Just like, the driver who's sitting in traffic complaining about the traffic doesn't realize that they're part of the traffic.
Yeah.
We say to employees, like, you're part of the culture. It doesn't necessarily mean, if you feel like we have a negative culture, it doesn't necessarily mean you're the fault of that. It's your fault, but you can be part of the solution. And let's run through some scenarios in which just changing the way you interact with people on a daily basis, or changing the way that you approach this particular type of assignment, can start to be those building blocks to changing the culture.
Jim, what
That,
I'm
that,
hearing what I'm hearing in this, I totally agree with you that everyone is responsible. It's that sometimes I hear, oh, it's the leadership's got to change. Well, no. And I love the analogy. I'm sitting in the traffic too, and I'm complaining about it. And that yes, we're all responsible, and that it takes time. The fact that
Mhm.
your committee realized, hey, this is more than, it's not just like 1 month, it's going to be years of work, and this 1 year just to get to that first stage, and understanding that culture does take time. And the last thing I heard was, and I hadn't thought about this was before, was that people's first experience of a relationship is in their family, and so they bring that to work. And I know that in public service, people are often in public service for decades, like for the
Mhm.
whole duration. They might go to different departments, but like they so early on, if their first experience is with family, and then they go into this workplace, and they're bringing that, and it keeps compounding. So that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about how uh, the the workplace is also, we also as leaders have a responsibility to help people understand how to be colleagues with one another, and
Yeah.
that's not family.
Yeah,
So
it's not a natural thing. I mean, it's
mhm,
not taught.
mhm,
It's just like how to be a brother, or a son in a family is not taught. But it is something that most of us don't encounter until we're already grown-ups.
mhm,
And yeah, and so just keeping that in mind, and realizing that, whether it's a new employee, or, to your point, somebody who's been working here for 35 years, um, that if you do have that mindset, if you are in a position of influence in an organization, and everybody has a degree of influence, but if you're in a position of authority and influence, recognizing that, okay, the person I'm interacting with might not really just know how to be a professional,
Hmm.
right? Or they've learned it through time, maybe without the best role models, just like people in life, right? Learn how to be a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband or a wife without great role models. And that doesn't really end well usually.
Hmm.
That we're surrounded by people who had to kind of make up how to be a professional person in relationships with coworkers. They had to make that up.
Hmm.
So, just to recognize and acknowledge that, like other relationships in our lives, that requires some care and feeding and modeling and development and intentionality. I think it's key.
So I feel like that actually kind of got to our that the third question around clear communication, because it's if people understand their responsibility of modeling it and also learning, because it's
Yeah.
I still have so much to learn and watching how other people communicate. So I want to get to this. I want to ask you about how you think about curiosity
Hmm.
and a resource for that. And I I was so impressed by Seattle IT's, was it your learning conference?
Yeah.
I mean, that was so, to have 2 days. Can you explain that? Can you share that with our listeners? Because I think that's a really unique investment in terms of inspiring that curiosity in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to give credit to the concept to the former CTO of our organization for starting that. I think it was maybe 2019. I think we had one instance of it before the pandemic hit, but it was structured like an actual conference. It was 2.5 days. It was off site. It was up at the Seattle Center, right under the shadow of the Space Needle, um, and it was an opportunity for staff to attend. Well, first, an opportunity for staff to present if they chose to, but also to attend presentations, I'm sorry, panel discussions, workshops, put on by their coworkers or by guests that we invited from the outside. And what you're referring to was last year's, where we invited you to come and present on your work on the forms of respect in the workplace. Um, and so, yeah, I think it is unique. I got some interesting reactions from coworkers of mine in other departments. Sort of like, wait, you're doing what? You're putting on your own conference, and how do you do that, and how do you afford that, and but it really was just a kind of roll up the sleeves, and we're gonna do it kind of approach. We have some very talented and very dedicated people here in the department who pulled it together. We didn't have to go outside and hire an event coordinator or anything like that. We kept costs really low, but we did. We mixed kind of the keynote speech concept of a conference, where I invited other department directors to come and present on how technology was affecting their work, and so that was in transportation, public utilities, and the environment, sustainability. Um, and my goal with that was really to help ground, or help everybody in my department ground themselves in, why are we doing this work,
Mm,
right? Because we can get so caught up in just fixing problems and making sure computers work, and lose sight of the fact that the outcomes that we are influencing, or the impacts that we're trying to achieve through our work, are mostly carried out by our colleagues in other departments in terms of how they affect the public, but that we are a critical component of that, and that we are relied on. We are looked to as the experts. We are relied on by those folks in other departments as a critical part of enabling them to do their work, to change the lives of others. So that was sort of the thesis statement, I guess, of the conference, was how do we help keep our staff connected to the real reasons that we do the work that we do. But yeah, I think it was last October, I believe, and we had been coming back to the office for a while. We had some work teams that weren't, and but this was really the first time that we had hundreds and hundreds of our staff together under one roof, intermingling and reconnecting with each other, and all sort of having the same the shared experience, and coming together in that way. and it was truly delightful, and it's a tradition I hope that we can keep up.
I mean, so many employers talk about learning at work, and yet they don't set aside the time to do it. The fact that you invested 2.5 days where people are not going to do their regular the work and just build relationships with each other, learn from one another, learn also the breaking of silos when you're actually interacting with other departments. I think that's tremendous. And if you can do it with 670 people, certainly people can do it with smaller groups, even if it's just a, a day or a day and a half. I just think that
Yeah,
is such
it's
a
it.
great
I mean,
model.
I wish it could have been something that all 670 staff could have participated in. Obviously, in some situations the work needed to go on,
Mhm.
and not everybody got to experience all 2.5 days. We are looking at ways of refactoring that this year to make to kind of keep the same thesis, if you will, but make it more accessible, and a little bit more, yeah, more accessible to everybody in our department, so everybody gets a chance to participate. It's kind of one of the only negative bits of feedback we
Mhm.
got was some work teams felt there's no way that I can
Mhm.
even for half a day, or for a full day, or even a half a day, pack up, go up to Seattle Center, come back. Like they just felt like they couldn't get away, and I regret that that was the case. But it just gave us an opportunity to rethink how we're going to deliver that or create that experience this time,
Mhm.
and make it more accessible for everybody in the organization.
Mhm. Yes, so the constant striving to figure out how to do more learning together.
Yeah.
So, for the sake of time, I got 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
The one is around practicing curiosity.
Mhm.
It's sometimes we don't do it. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
hard. We don't wanna do it. So can you give an example of it when it's hard for you or your teams to practice curiosity in your workplace?
Yeah. No, this was. I really welcome the opportunity to think about this, because I am an inherently very curious person, and some might even say nosy. Um, but to really think about, when do I feel welcomed to exercise that versus when do I feel not, was, yeah, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to give that some thought. And so, uh, I do consider the concept of curiosity to be among the most important traits of being a successful professional, or really just a successful person. Um, and I think that to be curious, one has to start from the point of view of admitting ignorance,
Mhm.
or the possibility of ignorance, admitting that you might not know something, or that, I think even worse, that you might be incorrect about something that you did feel that you knew, that you knew, or that you were certain about. Um, and and that can be really hard to do. I mean, it can require a lot of vulnerability to approach somebody else, or even just to admit it yourself if you're sitting in a dark room, that, I honestly just don't know that. Or you learn something or read something and you think, wait, hey, that upends this belief that I've had about something forever, right? Something that my dad told me when I was 6, or something that I learned in college, or like there's somebody out there calling that into question, and they might be wrong, right? But I have a need to find that out, to either confirm my belief or possibly change my mind about something. And that is really frightening, I think, for people. And it can be very hard to do in the workplace if the environment that you're in looks down on, or worse, even punishes people who admit ignorance, or who say, I don't know, or who have to come, in front of their boss or in front of their coworkers and say, I know I said this last week, but new information has come to light and I now believe this. And I think, you and I, before you hit the record button, we're talking about the political environment that public
Mhm.
servants work within, and I think that this is especially true. And I imagine it's especially true. I've never held office, but I see evidence of it being true for elected officials, not just at the city level, but all over the place. Um, that I think that people look probably unfairly to elected officials to know everything, to always be right, and to never change their minds.
Mhm.
And those conditions quash curiosity, or the
Mhm.
ability to practice curiosity. Um, and to be an elected official is to sort of constantly be in a position of tension, even potentially adversarial relationships with your opponents, who then will always try to capitalize on anything that they see as weakness. And so I think I can only imagine that people in office must feel that they can't ever admit that they might be wrong about something, or that they need to change their mind about something, right? I mean, we saw, I can't remember what candidate was deemed a flip flopper. I think it was John Kerry, just because he like came to a different opinion about something over his career. So I, you know, I think that is one of the situations in which would cause me to never want to be an elected official. But we work here in the city for elected officials and amongst elected officials and people who are very much in the public eye. And I think that that's got to be part of the everyday tension or circumstances that they're in. Um, but going back to the concept of psychological safety I mentioned earlier, I think that it is an organization or a leader's responsibility to create safe space for that curiosity, which means allowing or even celebrating people for saying, I don't know this, but I'm going to find out. Um, it's scary for people to be vulnerable, to demonstrate that on a daily basis. And I try to demonstrate it by seeking out information. I ask people routinely to share their knowledge with me, and I'm very careful because I also recognize my position of authority. I'm very careful to explain up front. I'm not doing it's not a trap, right? I'm not doing this because I'm seeing there's a problem or there's been a complaint or I think you're doing something wrong. I honestly want to learn. You are the expert here. You have the experience. I don't, and I'd like to understand maybe 10% of what you know, because I think that would make me more of an effective leader. And it would help me if I'm ever put in a position to have to defend your work, or to celebrate your work. I want to be able to speak at least a little authoritatively about, yeah, I know what this person does and what this person's doing is admirable. So that's just again something that it's just a practice. It's a practice that I have. I think every week I've got at least one or two 30-minute meetings with members of IT staff, which is just sit me down, explain to me your project, your program, your whatever, like I'm in third grade, and I don't know where you're coming from, solely for the purpose that I'm curious about you and your work. And it's something that I've done for a really long time, and it helps with everything we've been talking about. It helps with communication, helps with relationship building, helps with self awareness. It's a good practice.
So yeah, so even though the admitting ignorance is so key to practicing curiosity, it's still hard, and
Yeah,
and it can be really difficult for other people, especially if you're an elected official. So the political environment is really difficult. Jim, what's your kind of go to resource for the for inspiring curiosity in yourself? What, a book, film, anything
yeah.
that's just your go to?
Well, my academic degree is in film studies, and I came to that, I think, through a journey of curiosity that started when I was a kid and was just exposed to movies on cable television, right? So through the 80s. And, my memory of that time in my life was that the TV was always on, and, I would sometimes just stand, open mouthed in front of it, just changing channels until I saw something that interested me. I don't think that probably from the time I was 10 or 12 to moving out of my house, that I sat down and watched a movie deliberately from start to finish, right? It was this constant wash over of movies and shows. Um, but well, with one exception, and that is when I was probably 15 or 16, I saw the movie Blade Runner with Harrison Ford. And I don't know if it was, I mean, it's definitely something about that movie, but something about my mindset at the time, whatever circumstances existed, it just hooked me in a way that nothing else ever had. And I was very curious about that experience, right? Like, what is it with this movie that is just, it pulls me in. It's so, I want to learn everything about it. I want to live in that world. I want to understand everything I can about not just the fictional world that it creates, but how it came to be. It was something unlike I had ever seen before. And, I kind of carried that into college. And when I took a film studies class, which really I just like randomly picked out of the list of electives once, I mean, just film studies, that sounds cool. Um, it all kind of came together, right? The analytic abilities, it all clicked and it all made sense. And my final project was on that film, and it opened up this path of constant curiosity, I would say, for me in interrogating not just movies, but any sort of expression, right, of somebody else's creativity, and recognizing that, developing the tools to kind of decode it and break it apart and figure out what it really means. I love that process, right? And to discover that there was actually an academic discipline and potentially a job right down the road that would enable me to do that on a daily basis was inspiring. So I went to graduate school for that, and I ended up not deciding, for a number of reasons, not to pursue that as a career. Once kind of the reality of a PhD program, once I was immersed in the reality of a PhD program, I thought, wait a minute, this doesn't right. But I was also working an IT job at the time, and I had that as kind of a fallback plan, and that became, what was Plan B became Plan A in my life. But I still carry that experience, and I think that it has, you know, without being directly applicable to the work that I do. I mean, I don't tend to like bring up like, oh, this is just like what happened in Lawrence of Arabia, on any given day, But I think that ability to do that kind of analysis on, both written and visual media, and to really see the world through those lenses has given me the tools that I do use every day.
Jim, thank you for helping me imagine 15-year-old Jim, who was who was whose imagination and curiosity was sparked by Blade Runner. And what I'm hearing is just the awe that you had, that you were awed. It wasn't just the content itself. So, and yes, and just thinking about, what are those things that make us think about thinking, not just the content itself. Uh,
Yeah, that's a
yeah.
great way to put it. Yeah.
So, Jim, thank you so much. How can people reach you if they want to learn more
Oh,
about what you do, get advice from you? How can people
yeah.
reach
I
out to
mean,
you?
at this point, professionally, LinkedIn, for better or for worse, is the go-to place to find me and connect with me. And I've got, a silly old homepage at jimloader.com that just has a brief bio and some other ways to contact me if they're interested. But those would be the two main ways. And I would love people to reach out. I love talking about this stuff.
Jim, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your tips, your vulnerability, so that we can all learn how to get these insights on how to practice curiosity at work.
Oh, my
Thank you.
pleasure, Julie. Thanks for the opportunity. This was a lot of fun, and like I said, it gave me a lot of opportunity to think about things deliberately that I guess I just take for granted, or that just become part of my everyday life. And that's always important to take a step back and reflect. And this gave me that opportunity, so I really appreciate it.